International Cultic Studies Association, helping people since 1979. About ICSA. Founded in 1979, the International Cultic Studies Association, or ICSA, is a global network of people concerned about psychological manipulation and abuse in cultic and other high-control environments. ICSA is tax-exempt, supports civil liberties, and is not affiliated with any religious or commercial organizations. Our mission. ICSA provides information, education, and help to those affected by or interested in cultic and other high-control groups and relationships. Join or donate today at icsahome.com/membership. Disclaimer. Views expressed on ICSA websites or in ICSA's publications or events are those of the document's author or speaker and are not necessarily shared, endorsed, or recommended by ICSA or any of its directors, staff, or advisors. Dr. Patrick Knapp's interest in religious abuse recovery originates from his own experience in a very damaging Christian group from 1970 to 1984. He completed a master's degree in the philosophy of religion from Denver Seminary in winter of 2000. His master's thesis was titled The Place of Mind Control in the Cult Recovery Process. His doctoral studies focused on marriage, family systems, and attachment. His PhD thesis was titled A Survey of Religious Abuse and Recovery in 2019. Pat and his wife Heidi co-direct Becoming Free, LLC. Their organization facilitates educational and coaching support for all those who have been religiously abused. As a life recovery coach for over 35 years, Pat has assisted people to process harmful spiritual experiences for improved insight and emotional healing. He and Heidi provide HIPAA-compliant video, internet, and in-person life coaching and periodic support and recovery groups, both for former members and friends and family affected by religious or spiritual abuse.
My good friend Pat in the Denver area has joined us to talk about another part of the book we did, which was called Wounded Faith, which I'm sure you're aware of. And we enjoyed, would you say, Pat, we enjoyed putting the book together?
Yes, absolutely enjoyed it. Heidi and I were delighted to be a part of that project that really began. It was back in, was it 2018, Neil, that we had
in Hartford, Connecticut.
In Connecticut, yes.
Yes. And so the book has been out now for about a year. And so we are doing this series of webinars with various people that have contributed on various subjects. Today, the subject is stages of recovery. And it's chapter 4 in our book. And we're going to talk about those stages in brief today. But let me just start by asking Pat to say something about the subject of recovery. Recovery from what, Pat?
Well, recovery from abuse that occurs in a religious or spiritual environment.
And it does go on far more than we care to know about sometimes. You'd think that it shouldn't go on, right?
Well, absolutely. I think it's a part of the human condition that no matter what kind of environment, religious, spiritual, or otherwise, we find ourselves in, abuse happens. And it's unfortunate that it happens in some ways all the more vigilantly or all the more emphatically, so to speak, within a religious or spiritual environment.
And what I've found, Pat, is that even though we all enthusiastically contributed to this new book, it's a hard sell to have a conversation. People aren't lining up, buying tickets for the opportunity to talk about what is really a hard subject. Don't you think?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Neil.
No, that's all. Don't you think it's I find it to be a hard sell. We were part of putting this book together, and I thought the whole world would be saying, man, this is great. This is exciting. This is just wonderful. Let's talk about this for a long time. But even in the church that I attend, my wife and I attend here, and I'm in Virginia. It's a hard sell, as important as it is.
Well, yeah, I certainly concur. I think there are several good reasons. One, it's painful. And nobody enjoys going to painful places. And also, it's not simple, and that makes it challenging. One of the things that Heidi and I frequently will suggest to people, that there are two very common errors that are made in understanding the process of recovery from religious or spiritual abuse. One is that it's sometimes presented as overly simplistic or reductionist in nature. And the second one is that it sometimes is presented in an overcomplicated or undecipherable sort of way. So absolutely, it is
So who wants to talk about stuff that's overcomplicated?
Yeah.
And right, it is painful. So I'm going to read a little bit from your chapter, just a little bit, and then we're going to get into just reviewing quickly the stages of recover for our people here. And then we're going to go until about 11:30, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. At the beginning of the chapter, you say former members of abusive groups are unique individuals with distinctive histories that each person experiences in a particular way. Consequently, it is no wonder that what works for one former member may not, meaning a member of a cult or a religiously aberrant group, right, Patrick?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What works for one member may not meet the needs of another. At the same time, I suggest that a basic recovery process exists, which, when used as part of the foundation for providing support for recovery from religious abuse, helps normalize the experience of former members, offers them and their supporters understanding and hope. And that's what ICSA is all about, as I'm sure all of our participants today are aware. This is not about, the organization is not about retribution, taking action against abusive people, leaders, organizations. It's about helping victims. So let's just get right into the stages, the 7 stages, right, Pat?
Yeah, that's what I suggested. There are at least 7.
At least 7.
At least 7. 7 basic ones that I've determined over the course of many years, having been in a very aberrant form of Christianity for nearly 14 years. And then having studied since 1984 the whole topic of cultic studies.
And Heidi was in a group too, wasn't she?
Heidi was in a group as well. She was in a couple of different groups.
Okay.
And the nature of that, in a matter of speaking, was preparatory to what resulted in part to this particular chapter in Wounded Faith.
Okay, and so the first stage you've summarized in a simple one line: lacking awareness of one's needs. Tell us briefly, what do you mean by that? I thought I was aware of all of my needs.
Well, if only it were so easy. It's not. And I know for many years, people can go through and be very unaware as to what their needs are. And within an unhealthy religious or spiritual group, there is the encouragement to be unaware, to not go to one's authentic feelings, to not think through one's beliefs, to not examine the history of a particular group. So those are very common. Not uncommonly, many of these groups have various elements of thought reform or mind control that prohibits people from thinking and feeling very deeply about their experiences within a particular group.
So the first stage you would suggest is to become aware of your needs. Is that correct?
Well, the first stage is a lack of awareness. The second stage is between stage 1 and stage 2, that there is, I would suggest, a cognitive or emotional snapping that occurs, and a choice is presented to us. It's a little bit like, if you recall the movie The Matrix, which is one that I've in many respects really enjoyed.
I'm familiar with it, yes.
And there is a particular scene in the movie where there are, early on, there are two choices made to the main character, Neil, of a red pill or a blue pill. He takes the one pill, he wakes up in the morning, and everything is as it has been in the past. He takes a red pill, and then everything changes, and reality becomes something very different.
He's becoming aware. He's becoming aware.
His awareness becomes very different.
Yes.
And I think stage 2 is indicative of that red or blue pill choice that occurs not uncommonly when something affects a person deeply in a personal, emotional, and perhaps cognitive sort of way. They become aware of something they were not aware of earlier. They become clear on some emotion that they're having that they didn't think much about in the past. So that is the beginning, in a matter of speaking, of the movement from stage 1 into stage 2.
And so you're saying stage 1 is basically sitting there and not being aware.
Correct.
Of what you're, which is a bizarre place to be, I would think, but that is common enough. All right, so stage 3 then is you have labeled as showing unproductive, heightened behavioral activity. Tell us what that means.
Well, not uncommonly, when one first comes out, there is a sense of loss that one wants to recover. And there can be very commonly one of two different kind of responses. One is to go down the path of becoming a little bit like an aggressive honey badger that says, I want a pound of flesh out of this thing. I absolutely want to get revenge. I want to take a machete to the people that have injured me. Or the other response sometimes is one of, I want to become an iceberg. I want to just bury myself. I want to just let me hide. Just let me shut down. So this third stage typically has one or the other. Quite often it has kind of a honey badger kind of approach that is very aggressive. But sometimes the aggression can turn inward, and as a consequence, emotions shut down in a hard, fast sort of way. Okay.
I mean, this is where people are living, is in these stages, isn't it? I mean, this is reality. This is, and I want to commend you for not only for the research and the work, but really talking about stuff. I'm a former pastor for all of our participants, a retired pastor, dealing with people professionally, and I certainly understand what Pat is saying when people are becoming aware of where they're at, but they're agitated and striking out a little bit. Stage 4, you've got struggling to identify a relational-based recovery team. Tell us who that might be.
Well, not uncommonly, when one comes out of an abusive religious environment, they really have a hard time understanding, what does a healthy relationship look like? What does a healthy support person look like? So that is incredibly challenging, and really kind of at the core of how recovery occurs is, how does the former member determine what is healthy and unhealthy, what is authentically spiritual and what is inauthentically spiritual or religious. And that takes some time to define. Groups, organizations such as ICSA, International Occultic Studies Association, my experience of it over the last nearly 30 years, I think my first presentation with ICSA, formal presentation, was in 1997. But certainly I found a lot of supportive people within the organization. Some were Christians like myself, some were not. There's no question support can come from all sorts of means, all sorts of people. And we need to be careful not to narrow ourselves as a former member too vigilantly to only those that are seemingly spiritual or religious, or only those that are secular. I think help and support can come from both camps, absolutely, and needs to come from both camps.
Okay, so there needs to be support and some kind of a structure of support that you're calling a team. Stage 5 is exploring and discovering life outside the past abusive group. Oh, fun.
Well, yeah, and that involves certainly discovering or finding an answer to who am I? After I've been in this group, after I've put in so much time and energy, and maybe I've had an occupation within that group, do I still want to continue that occupation? Do I want to go for additional education? What relationships do I need to change? What do I do now? That is certainly a part of stage 5. And one of the messages that people absolutely need to hear from others is that in the course of exercising this stage 5, failure is okay. Failure is not final. Okay. Perfectionism is not required. Certainly, much of what's needed, particularly in stage 5, is to learn how to have fun again in life, because very commonly, whether one comes from a formal cult, what you might refer to as a cult, or as a taco, a totalist, aberrant Christian organization, one needs to, again, understand that part of the recovery is learning how to have fun and feeling okay about doing that.
But this involves meeting new people, maybe, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And that's scary.
That's absolutely scary. And anybody that suggests otherwise are idiots, frankly. Because, but, you know, we are told, whether it's emotion-focused therapy, whether it's any number of models for psychological recovery, in order to grow, one has to be willing to risk again.
Okay. All right. I'll accept that. Stage 6 is preserving self-recovery, struggling with excessive support to others. What does that mean?
Well, there is a huge tendency for those that come out of religiously abusive backgrounds that once they get a certain amount of recovery under their belt, they can just go wild in working in the area of helping others recover, and do so much so they can easily cause an incredible expense to be paid by their family and friends, because they're basically shutting others out in order to have this sense of, again, the sense of redemption, the sense of wanting to help other people. And this is huge, Many of those that are, if you look at the profiles within those that work in the ICSA field, in the ICSA organization, I should say, many of those come out of themselves, have either come out of religiously abusive backgrounds or have loved ones that have come out. So
they're overbalancing.
Yeah, and it's hard because one wants to, when they come out, again, they want to have redemption. They want to have some sort of good stuff come out of, and they want to be able to help other people. The same is true when somebody has experienced a addiction of some sort, whether it be alcohol or drugs. Very commonly, after coming out and getting a certain amount of recovery under their belt, they want to go into the field of helping others recover. And sometimes they can be overly vigilant in doing so.
Okay.
And thereby not really meeting their deeper needs and the deeper needs of family and friends.
So the pendulum is swinging so far the other way that they're becoming obsessive about investing too much time and attention. And yeah. Well, the last stage you've got, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the pendulum thing is huge for those coming out of recovery. Yeah. We've had recently folks that Heidi and I have worked with, sometimes have come out of a really hyper charismatic kind of background, and they pendulum swing to a very anti-charismatic kind of background. Such as, just to give an example, going to maybe a group that is associated with John MacArthur, and
that's the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, the other end of the spectrum. And then one particular fellow that I've been working with for several months, he's now pendulum swinging back to more of a center, more of a yes, well-informed, non-reactive sort of way,
right,
and a healthier position.
Yeah. Okay, and your seventh stage is providing a consistent, well-informed, empathic holding environment for other former members. Explain that one to us.
Well, yeah, by this time, and not uncommonly, depending on the experience and the duration that people have had within their past a religiously abusive group, there is an eventual place that one hopefully gets to in the course of time. Sometimes it's several years before people get to stage 7, where they can, in a balanced sort of way, take care of their needs and be able to integrate the recovery that they've experienced in such a way that they can genuinely support other people in a healthy sort of way, rather than a very codependent sort of way that is unhealthy and ultimately damaging.
So, there's a key word in what you just used the word in, I think, in all of these, and that's seeking balance. And that of course is a central issue in a lot of different aberrant groups, is just being out of balance. They may not be fully heretical per se, but they might be, but they may not be. It may just be so overbalanced on so many things. And so we're seeking balance in recovery. Am I right?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think the other piece of that is seeking a certain pace. Because sometimes people, when they come out, and I can think of several people that we've worked with recently, and in my own situation, looking back, particularly back in the early 80s when I came out, there is a tendency to want to go faster and produce more than what one is actually ready for.
Because it does take time to get our bearings and relax and realize some of the things that you've mentioned in the earlier stages here.
Well,
And
it's
form
in
new
many,
relationships.
yeah, and that's very true, because I think so much of what people have experienced in many of these unhealthy religious or spiritual systems is production, performance.
Yeah.
And just as an example, I had a lady recently that came out of a very aberrant form of Christianity. And I had asked her in one point along the way to read a particular chapter in a particular book, and that we would discuss it the following week. And she didn't have the book. She'd have to order the book and then read the chapter. And I suggested, let's, process that a little bit. Well, she got the book. That was on Monday that we met. On Tuesday or Wednesday, she was able to get the book pretty quickly. And by the following Monday when we met, I asked her, I said, were you able to get the book and read the first chapter? And she says, well, yes, I did. And I read the rest of the book, and I outlined the book, and I put notes in the side margins. She had
the first week.
Yeah, in the first week. And it's like, no, slower. So, one of the things, because of her past experience having been very performance oriented, it's not as though somehow she comes out of that group and suddenly that changes.
And, I mentioned this, I think, in a previous webinar. I'll mention it again. One of our friends within ICSA that came out of 20 years in the family and the Children of God.
Yeah.
And he and his wife go to a church. They're part of a religious community. This is back in Massachusetts. And I said, why did you choose that church? And his explanation was, it's safe.
Yeah.
It feels safe. And so the drivenness that many aberrant groups will, and you call it production, insist upon is a thing we've got to recover from. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any other summarizing comments on this process, Pat?
Well, I think one of the things that I didn't mention, I think that it'd be important to mention, is that late in the recovery, generally, is when the former member needs to not only process things like triggers, emotional triggers, not only process things like thought reform or mind control, but they also need to start unpacking the whole issue of family of origin, roles, rules, and boundaries. And that very commonly, with the exception of second generation or multi-generational members, former members, that is something that those that have come out of a religiously abusive environment eventually need to unpack and to think through, because it's not as though they walked into a religiously abusive environment as a blank slate, as a tabula rasa. They walked in with certain rules, roles, and boundaries, or lack thereof, that they habituatedly learned from their family of origin, their birth family. And so that eventually needs to be unpacked as well. But people again are at different stages and at different readiness to do that. Some people aren't ready to unpack the theology of their group, their belief system, till 20, maybe 30 years after they get out.
Yeah.
Others, like one lady that Heidi and I worked with, had come out of Waco. She had lost relatives in a fire. And she was
Branch Davidians you're talking about.
The Branch Davidians, thank you.
Yeah.
She wasn't ready to go to the family of origin stuff for years. Eventually she did. But in the meantime, her attitude was, well, when we presented that as a possibility, she says, that's an area of Chicago that I don't want to visit.
Interesting.
Was her comment.
Yeah.
And that certainly had to be respected.
Yeah, and family of origin is an integral part of all of us if we had any family of origin. And yeah, okay. Thank you, Pat. It does take a fair amount of courage, to use the Cowardly Lion's word, to face up to the need for recovery. It's one thing to leave a group that has been damaging or hurtful. It's another thing to enter the process of recovery, and that takes courage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly takes years and depending on one's background, and it takes a diversity of people to meet the needs. That's why Heidi and I both stress the importance of having a team of people that can speak into a person's recovery.
Yeah.
We have our first question. Do you have any advice on recovering while being a parent of very young children? I feel as if my recovery process has been delayed because I'm so busy taking care of my children. There doesn't seem to be a lot of time to read, for extracurricular, building new relationships, etc.
Yeah. Well, and I can speak to that. When I came out of the group that I did in January of '84, I had 4 small children. I think my oldest at that time was 8 years old. The youngest was about 3. So yes, I think one of the things that I found incredibly helpful was the importance of getting involved in some sort of support group. Either at that time, back then, of course, they didn't have support groups online. There was fortunately some support groups that I attended in the Denver area, and that was helpful. But again, when there's young children, one of the things eventually that need to be addressed is how have the young children been affected? And that can feel overwhelming as well. And I think probably the best thing that I can suggest is seek out overviews or short articles. Don't weigh yourself down too much with large academic books, because the amount of time necessary when you have a lot of small children under your roof makes that very, very hard to do. So people and simplified material, I think nowadays I would say, there's lots of stuff on the internet in terms of maybe 20-minute presentations that you might be able to listen to maybe after the kids go to bed. Or you might be able to listen to on your, if you have a cell phone, an iPhone, listen to while you're traveling to and from somewhere. If you're traveling to work or traveling to a friend's that you can listen to. You learn to become, over the course of time, hopefully, able to use your time really well and not try to go too fast. Understand slow is okay. And to not be overly critical of yourself, because that's a huge critical of oneself, and either at all or to do way too much at the cost of your family. So finding a balance and using your time well is how I'd respond to that.
Thank you so much. We have another question, which is, have you worked with people recovering from abuse of faith/religion from non-Bible based cults? And or have you worked with people attempting to recover or find balance who have pain from Christian upbringing, not extreme, but causing pain?
Oh, absolutely. We have worked with a broad variety of people, everything from Scientology to Christian Science, religious science, to New Age cults. We worked with a broad base. The majority of people, admittedly, we've worked with are from Bible-based groups, but we've worked with a broad spectrum. And again, with each individual that one works with, or each support group that one works with, one has to know good questions to ask in order to find good answers as to how recovery occurs. Because if you don't ask the right questions, you certainly aren't going to get the right answers. So my response to this question is, it's important to know what the right questions are in order to assess well the individual needs of the person that you're working with, whether they're from a Bible-based group or whether they're from a non-Bible-based group.
And I would add the observation that, it's not a black and white thing. It's not, it's Bible-based and it's orthodox and it's traditionally correct, or it's, off the wall, something wacky. There's a spectrum here. There are groups that are Bible-based in general that have some weird stuff embedded. And so I would say, I would point out to people that there are variations in, it's not a technical term, but there's variations in weirdness in groups. And I mean, I'm friends with a lot of different people from a lot of different religious traditions and communities. And some of them have some strange stuff embedded that's just part of who they are. And so it's not just all or nothing, Bible-based or not.
Oh,
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think, as I say, being sensitive and being caring for the individual as an individual, not as a project.
Yes.
Not as somebody who you're going to dump your opinions on, but to which somebody that you're going to hopefully get to know well and understand well, first and foremost. Because sometimes they want to go to the belief system stuff. Other times they want to talk about thought reform or mind control. Or they want to talk about emotional triggers. How do I work with triggers? We've had some support groups that we've done, and we periodically do support groups. Some of the support groups, we don't, and we haven't hardly said anything at all about religious matters specifically, or about what does the Bible say, or what does Scripture say. Other groups have come to us. We had one group of people that all came out together out of a very aberrant form of Christianity. And they said candidly, look, we want to unpack what the Bible says about how to child rear. We want to understand about male, female roles, because in our group, this is what occurred, and we need to unpack it. And Heidi and I were able to do that. But it just depends on what the needs are of the group that we're working with, or the individuals that we're working with. And we have to listen carefully and help to identify what is our greatest need in this moment, and then work with that.
Okay, thank you so much. Our next question is, when do you think someone is ready to help others in a healthy way, not a codependent, reactive way? I'm hoping to do spiritual abuse awareness in the future.
That's going to vary greatly. There was one time in my experience of religious abuse recovery where I would have answered that and said, well, maybe a month, maybe a year. Other times I would have said along the way, give it 3 to 5 years. It'll just vary a great deal on the individual and about what they're ready for in the moment. So there's not a hard, fast answer to that. It'd be nice if there was. I think some people aren't ready literally for years, and other ones may be ready within a few months. It depends on what sort of recovery work they would be involved in helping others. So it'll vary a great deal.
Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is, can you speak more about the different people who have been part of teams and how you've been involved in facilitating the cohesion and establishment of a team?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, certainly, I think keeping myself open to a variety of different folks coming from different backgrounds is very important. You know, when I first came out of the group that I did, an awful lot of my work that I did on my own recovery was related to theological stuff. So a lot of the people that I worked with initially were theologians, professors, were people that kind of chucked a lot of books to me, so to speak, and I was just trying to read them as quickly as I could. At other points in my recovery, as I gained strength in that area, I was more willing to open myself up to counseling, to working with those that are in clinician fields, and understanding how each of them could bring different things to the table. That's part of what my book, Understanding Religious Abuse and Recovery, I identify in there how it is that people, you know, there's four essential, in my opinion, four in the current field of cultic studies recovery, there are four essential approaches to how recovery occurs. And each of those approaches have their strengths and weaknesses. And similarly, I think in drawing from a host of different people, you find strengths and weaknesses that you can, over the course of time, integrate into your own practice, your own work in the field, that I think is really an essential piece. So I think keeping, the short answer, again, keeping yourself open, exploring new and different things, not shutting yourself down too quickly, understanding that, you know, your view of recovery is going to change over the course of time. Those are all really important features.
Well, thank you so much. Our next question is, what do you suggest for help for couples? I was born into Scientology, but not in it, and feel this background is like a third party in our close, long relationship.
Absolutely, positively. I understand that one again very well. And my suggestion, probably if I was to point to a book that would be helpful for somebody out of Scientology, out of a non-Christian sort of background, I would say Hold Me Tight would be a wonderful book written by Dr. Sue Johnson is her name. Sue Johnson, is that correct? I think. Sue, let me double check. Sue Johnson, yes, Dr. Sue Johnson. She wrote a wonderful book, Hold Me Tight. She is an EFT, emotion-focused therapy counselor. And the book, Hold Me Tight, gives some really good exercises and practices to help build, help repair marital damage that has occurred. In the same book, Wounded Faith, that we're talking about here, one of the chapters that Heidi and I did was specifically on that topic of marital repair following religious abuse. And we draw a lot from Sue Johnson's work. Sue Johnson did, as I say, a very good book, Hold Me Tight, which is a wonderful guide to understanding marital bondedness. The Christian alternative to that is another book that she wrote called Created for Connection, that takes the same principles but puts them within a biblical context. But I think both books, depending on where one is coming from, one or the other certainly can be very supportive and helpful. Certainly seeking somebody, if reading a book, reading some articles on the topic of emotion-focused therapy, of what its emotional bonding look like. If there's more damage to it, it may mean finding a good marriage and family counselor. That's certainly another piece of it. Again, different people will have different needs. So you have to kind of explore for yourself along the way and feel okay about exploring. To find, as I say, a good person or persons that can help speak into, because the marriage thing, absolutely, whether it's Scientology, whether it's religious science, Christian science, I don't care what it is, they're all going to pervert, they're all going to do huge damage to marital relationships typically.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, I'm at the stage where I'm helplessly watching people stuck in the group I had a fortune of being able to leave. It's heartbreaking. Do you have suggestions for how to deal with this psychologically? Some are aware they're in an abusive group and some are not aware.
Yeah. Well, and that's hard, particularly if you're still connected at some level with these people. It's very hard. One lady I've worked with for several months came out of a very aberrant form of Christianity for decades. She had decades of experience, and she had a lot of relationships that she still had at some level in the course of having come out, and finding a balance of how much do I interact with these folks and who do I interact with, and who do I start to develop new relationships with? Again, it's going to need to be determined on a individual basis, and perhaps with the help of a counselor or a life coach, because it is very hard when so many of your relationships sometimes are people that are still in the group, sometimes relatives that are still in the group, and it is painful, but it's important that one, in a matter of speaking, I'm sure you've all heard the metaphor of the importance of putting the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on the person next to you. If you're in a flight and the plane is in a mode that you need to use oxygen, you put it on yourself first, and it's really important that you take care of your own needs first and foremost, and feel okay about that, as opposed to feeling like you need to rescue others. And that's a real hard one to wrestle with. But I think, finding help within a support group, finding help in a life coaching kind of environment, finding help in materials that might give you examples of people that have done similar sort of things. There's a lot of material out right now of former members, books that they've written. And I think, particularly now on the internet too, with what we have available now, when people say, well, there's no resources, well, they just don't know where to look, because the resources are there. Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much. Our last question that we have in the chat right now, unless anyone else puts one in, is, do you touch on the impact of traumatic narcissism and gaslighting in your work?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to not do that, to not go to the subject of narcissistic abuse, to not go to the subject of gaslighting is, in my estimation and in Heidi's estimation, unconscionable. It has to be done. The nature of religious abuse is that it is a system of influence. It's a system. It includes what other people have done to you. It includes examining some of your own contributions to the mix. It includes ultimately examining your own, as I suggested, family history. There's culpability across the board. And the issue is not, is there culpability on those that are religiously abusive leaders? Of course there is. There absolutely needs to be, for those in recovery, they need to be able to name it in order to tame it. So naming what is gaslighting, naming what is narcissism, naming what is thought reform, naming what are emotional triggers, those are core to the subject of recovery. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to remind everybody that this webinar will be, obviously, is being recorded and will be available in probably about a week for anyone who's viewing it. So thank you so much, Pat and Neil.
Thank you, Dr. Knapp, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for attending. It looks like we have about 25 people that are on board right now on this, have been on board. And I really encourage you all, whether you're former members or people that work with former members, to drill down, to explore not only these ideas we've been sharing, but also to do some of your own self-examination as well, particularly for those that are clinicians among you, because all of us need recovery in some form or fashion, and it'll be a long-going basis. I mean, I'm 72. When Heidi and I first got married, when I was 62, I told her I wanted 50 years of good marriage. Now, a lot of people will laugh at that, and they'll say, 50 years, yeah, it'll be 112. Well, my mother just passed away last month, and she was 96. And she would have lived well over to 100 if it hadn't been for a bad accident. So my suggestion to you all is, don't give up in your understanding of this important topic. Drill down on it, go after it, and do so in a paced sort of way, in a thoughtful sort of way, and hopefully with a lot of good supports from people that are caring and loving. There's a lot of them out there. I think, if I was to kind of summarize, what do people in recovery from religiously abusive backgrounds most need? I would suggest an acronym to you. The acronym is AIR, H-E-I-R, AIR, like the heir of an estate. They need hope. They need encouragement. They need insight. And they need to build resilience for the healing journey. So in the course of whether you're a former member or you're helping former members, if you keep those 4 basic principles in mind, they'll help guide you to what you read, what you experience, and how you can support others. Think about what brings this person hope? What brings me hope? What brings encouragement? What doesn't bring encouragement? What brings insight? Who are the people that are going to give us good insight? And finally, what's going to bring resilience? What's going to bring tenacity to my recovery or to the recovery of another person that I'm working with? 4 basic principles. If you remember nothing else, remember those 4. Those are important. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for participating. If you're interested in continuing to support ICSA, please join or donate at icsahome.com/membership.